Hello, my name is Cara Syers, and this is my case study on internet use violations. I'm going to base my answers off of my 15 years of experience in a school that sounds a lot like Roosevelt High School. And I'm not going to assume the role of anyone in particular, but just consider myself as one of the administrators. So what do we know beginning with the case? We know that a teacher at Roosevelt High School, Miss Cindy Walker, received an anonymous email directing her to an internet website. When she went to that website, she found highly suggestive comments about her personal behaviors and critical comments about the rigor of her classes using vulgar curse words. The website ended by asking, "Who wants Miss Walker to disappear?" When she viewed the website, she immediately wanted to call the police, but instead she notified the principal, Dr. Stephen Forbes, and asked him for his advice on how to proceed. Dr. Forbes viewed the website and felt it was not an immediate threat, so he took the following steps. He printed hard copies of the email on the website. He asked Miss Walker to identify sort of possible suspects based on incidences that may have happened in her classroom, and because it happened on a weekend, he told her that he would enlist the help of the district technology specialist in the morning. After the phone call, Miss Walker left her home and went to stay with her parents. A little bit of additional background information that I'm kind of making inferences about. RHS is in an affluent community, so parents are highly educated and then most likely highly involved. Students have access to the latest technology, so the pool of suspects certainly is broadened. I think you can't just, think about one student in particular. In regards to the teacher, she has a high level of education, graduate school, doctorate work, but she has a pretty low level of classroom experience, so first or second year teaching. Complaints have been made to the principal by students and parents regarding her heavy workload, what they consider poor instruction, and ultimately high levels of stress for students. The principal has offered Ms. Walker strategies and suggestions, but they have not thus far been successfully implemented. Dr. Forbes, the principal, has been at RHS for 9 years, and he takes great pride in a very prestigious school and making great hires in regards to teachers. So, questions I want answered as I go through this investigation. First of all, who created the email on the website? Can we figure that out? And most importantly, I think, is the threat at the end of that website credible? And ultimately, is Ms. Walker safe? I know Dr. Forbes didn't feel that it was that serious of a threat, but that's not something that I would make a decision about. I would enlist some help, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Another question, were the email and the website created using district or personal devices? Because this will most likely determine whether the school or law enforcement will deal with the individual once they're identified. I'll talk about that more later as well. Were there any interactions between Ms. Walker and the creator of the website that we're not aware of? Did something happen that we haven't found anything out about quite yet that could have led to this incident? And then ultimately, once the issue at hand is dealt with, the internet stuff, what can be done to improve the classroom environment for Ms. Walker, her students, and her parents? So I guess if I have to kind of look at all that information and identify 3 specific problems, I would say number 1 would be that derogatory comments and a possible threat have been made online against Ms. Walker. The source of this information is unknown, and we need to identify it. And then once this occurs, appropriate action, either, like I said, through school or law enforcement, must be taken. Second problem is that Ms. Walker does not feel safe, so regardless of the actual intent, whether it was real or a prank, appropriate measures must be taken to help Ms. Walker feel safe in her home and work environments until the issue is resolved. We have to take that seriously. And then the third problem I would identify is that Ms. Walker's first few years of teaching have been unsuccessful. So moving forward, we're going to need to give her some strong support, both from the department and us as administrators, and really help her improve her rapport with students and parents so that ultimately she wants to stay in the teaching profession. In terms of a plan of action, what are we going to do based on all this information? I've kind of identified 3 steps: communication, documentation, and conflict resolution. But I do want to note, I don't think these steps occur one after the other. I think they're kind of all happening at the same time. So step 1 would be to communicate with all of the appropriate parties. So that would include the school resource officer. He's probably the first person that I would go and talk to. I'd give him all the evidence that I had and ask him and use his wisdom and expertise to determine if the threat towards Ms. Walker is credible, and therefore anyone else involved. We need to keep her safe if this is serious. The next thing I would probably do is enlist the help of the district and school technology specialists so that we can see if we can figure out where that email and website originated. I would visit the classroom and talk to the students of Miss Walker and ask that if anyone had any information and was willing to come forward, that they do so confidentially to me. And then I would begin to interview groups of students. I don't think you can single out Randy Franks because we don't have enough evidence for that, and that could get you in a lot of trouble. But I think that if you started to talk to students and just ask them very general questions, a story might start to emerge that you could piece together. Depending on the seriousness of the threat, I would talk with the superintendent. Again, it would just depend on how serious it was. And then once identified, if we did figure out who made the online website, I would meet with that individual and their parents. In regards to documentation, I think you got to make sure you're covering your steps all along the way. We know that hard copies have already been printed, but I would continue to monitor that website for any additional changes or comments to ensure that no new threats are made against Miss Walker or maybe anybody else. For example, if a student starts to talk, then maybe that could lead to a threat against them as well. I would also be recording a timeline of the investigation, really keeping a step-by-step record of everything that happened, information I gained from the experts, and also just kind of a list of people who I know are informed of the situation for confidentiality and privacy reasons. And then finally, as I interviewed students, I think it would be really important to take written statements from anyone who knew anything, just so that it doesn't become a he said, she said, but we've got what they said in their own words. And a third step that I would really incorporate would be conflict resolution and then discipline and consequences. Again, first and foremost, if the school resource officer considers the threat credible, I would request that law enforcement get involved in order to keep her safe. That's not something I want to take into my own hands, but that might mean, keeping her out of her house for a few days, but having another officer outside of her door, something along those lines. If we could identify the creator of the email and the website, then we would assign appropriate consequences. A lot of the research I did about student rights and privacy told me that if it was made at school, then there's a policy in place for discipline and consequences. If it's made at home, you're dealing with freedom of speech, and so if it's an actual threat, then of course you want to take action, but law enforcement would have to do that. And finally, in terms of just conflict resolution, I would want to really help Miss Walker moving forward. She needs to be respected as the authority in the classroom. So I don't think starting to remove students or having an administrator do all the talking is really the best way to go. I think we need to give her strategies so that she can kind of take control of her classroom and really gain the respect of everybody there. We would need to have a specific measurable plan. So a check-in, or how are these strategies working? Gauge, the feelings of students and parents, and just really have a specific plan in place for how to help her moving forward. In terms of how to really promote the success of all students, I think that as I went through this case study, I really did it in three ways. Number one, I always considered safety the first priority, so that through all three steps of the plan, I was always thinking first and foremost about the safety of Miss Walker and any other students that were involved. Secondly, I think I tried to treat all the students and staff fairly and ethically, so I took Miss Walker's fears seriously. It wasn't something I just blew off because obviously she felt it was serious. And then on the other side, I didn't, start to accuse any one student until actual evidence was presented. And then finally, in terms of promoting success for everyone, I tried to come up with a plan to actually help Miss Walker improve her classroom management and the rapport with students, because if we can do that, then we can benefit everybody involved. Things that I was thinking, feeling, and valuing. Thinking, is everyone safe? Are we taking this seriously? That's always kind of a number one concern with me, I guess just given my experiences. All the while, am I making the right choices, and am I missing anything? So not second guessing myself, but just, am I really doing this with everyone's best interest in mind, and not just, a quick way out. Things I was feeling, I was concerned for everyone's safety. I felt a sense of urgency to really resolve this as quickly as possible. And I felt a little frustration over students' high technology abilities, but low decision-making abilities. I've worked with teenagers for a long time, and they sure know how to use those phones and computers. but sometimes, man, do they make some stupid choices. And finally, what do I value? Well, I value a thorough response that's timely, so we want to do it quickly, but we want to do it right. I value a fair and ethical approach, so nothing is going to come back to haunt us. Oh man, if we hadn't have done that, we could go this route, but because we didn't do the steps appropriately, now we're in trouble. And ultimately, I value a positive improvement in the relationships between Miss Walker and her students. Questions that are still unresolved, I guess. Have all of the creators of the online content been identified? How far does this chain go? Have we cut it off at the roots, or did we just cut off a branch of the tree? And has the site been removed or dealt with? Again, that's a fine line, but I think once there's a threat, we can, again, of course, have it removed. What can we do to prevent this from happening again? I don't think we can ever be 100% positive that it'll never happen again, but how can we learn and how can we get better from what's happened? And then ultimately, will Miss Walker's classroom environment improve? We've got a plan, but is it going to work, and can she recover from this and move forward? As I look at Standard 5, ways in which I addressed different parts of those standards, I guess the way in which I demonstrated a sense of integrity and ethics would be that I acknowledged that Miss Walker's perception of the situation is her reality. So what she views is what she views as real. So prank or not, we have to take that threat seriously. I think that shows integrity on my part. And then also I brought in a team to help me. So the school resource officer, the technology specialists, certainly I never want to assume that I know everything and will always make the best choice. So bringing in experts can only help me really think about all of our options. Ways in which I demonstrated fairness or acted with fairness. I did not jump to any conclusions regarding suspects. Again, that Randy Franks was named. I don't think we can use that until we know more. So I interviewed a multitude of students, and then we'll make judgments based on fact and not hunches. And then I guess the main piece of the issue was the threat against Miss Walker, but another piece was the fact that students and parents were kind of unhappy with Miss Walker's struggles in the classroom. So I think by addressing that as well, coming up with a plan for improvement, parents and students will feel like they've been heard. And finally, ways in which I demonstrated a personal and professional code of ethics. I maintained clear documentation so that I can show that I've got a confidential but consistent and ethical investigation going on through this whole issue. And I was knowledgeable in regards to student rights. So, I've done a little research. Like I said, I know our internet policies for our school and district, but I also know that there's some gray area if things are made at home. So, we want to make sure that we assign consequences that are according to the law and according to the student code of conduct. So that is the end of my presentation, and I learned a lot. It's a lot of work for sure, but it was interesting to kind of think about all the sides of this different case study.